It's frozen. No, it's on frozen on the projector.
British over engineering. It's fine.
Good morning. Welcome to Chicago. We have Pavan to thank again for a nice picture. I feel like I'm really loud and echoey. Does that sound that way to you? Very echoey. All right, we'll just have to deal with it. Well, welcome to the first meeting of this IETF. We appreciate you being here. We have a pretty good, sit back here, I think, have a pretty good agenda. As this is the first meeting, it's worthwhile to spend a moment on Note Well. This is the typical Note Well we have at the IETF. If you're not familiar with it, I suggest looking at the URL on the bottom, go to the IETF page and go read it. But basically, anything you talk about here becomes part of our meeting record. We are streaming both audio and video with Meet Echo. We have at least one person on Meet Echo, our secretary, Matt Hartley, who very actively supports us. We appreciate his efforts. Please make sure you speak in the mic. Say your name if you come to the mic. Where is the room mic? Do we not have a room mic? Well, we'll share. No, that's the speaker's mic. Well, we'll figure it out. But you know, so don't be shy. The line forms at the projector, and you'll come share with the presenter. We are using Etherpad as usual. Please join. I'll join as soon as my laptop decides that it wants to work again. Until then, if someone could also channel Jabber, keep a watch on Jabber, on the Jabber room. Do we have anyone who's willing to sit in Jabber? Okay, we got a couple of hands. I will get there, it's just my laptop decided to die. And the agenda is in the usual place. We have one agenda change, and the presenters don't even know it. Is Groove? Oh, thank you. We have mics. Oh, there you are. So we're going to do a presentation that's labeled 8 before number 6. So we have 2 Groove back to back. Is that all right? Okay. And that's the only agenda change. We have one recent RFC. We have one document that's making its way through the editor's queue, and we've had one recent publication request, and no new erratas. We have a couple of documents that are post last call. We had talked with the authors of both. I should disclose that I'm a co-author on the second, and there was an intent to get uploads of both of these documents first thing this morning. I can say for at least the second one that the author dropped the ball and didn't submit it yet. That would be me. Maybe my co-author will pick up for me.
I'm doing it right now.
Right. So, so the author failed on the second one, but we'll get it in today. LSP Diversity, I didn't see the announcement, but I know that they have a draft.
They posted.
Oh, posted. Great, thank you. So those 2, we hope will be able to progress pretty rapidly now. So we have a few documents that we've already identified as they're going to be last called. They're ready for last call. They would have been last called a couple of weeks ago, but we didn't want to pile on with this meeting and make it so that there was inadequate review because people were doing meeting prep. But these 3 documents we're going to have last call pretty soon. Feel free to start reviewing now. We don't need to talk about the new documents because I think we're pretty familiar with them, and also we'll hear about them again in the detail status. No new liaisons. At this point, everyone's familiar with our IPR process. We'll continue to follow that process. It's our process. It's not a formal IETF process, but we still will follow it. Should I touch on that other issue now about using those? So one of the dynamics that's happened a few times in the working group, and we may talk about it a bit later, is that there will be a lot of heated discussion among authors on a topic, and they have it just among the authors. And then they come up with a solution and pose it to the working group and say, here's the solution. And then they don't really want to talk about it. And that's not a very good way of building consensus. If the authors had that discussion, the same discussion they had in private, they had it on the working group list, everyone who was interested could, 1, follow, and 2, possibly contribute. And at the end, when there was agreement, you'd have working group agreement. So why am I saying this? I'm saying, please, if you are going to have a very good technical discussion, have it on the mailing list. Involve the rest of the working group and help build consensus in the working group, and perhaps you'll even get a better solution because someone in the working group may have a good idea too. The last administrative thing is we're going to have our joint session on Yang. This time it's hosted by MPLS. It's on Friday, so we get basically the first session and almost the last session. So sorry to make you stay the whole week. We hope you do and participate. Today, you'll see that there's several of the same drafts being talked about that are also talked about in the joint session. In the joint session, it's going to be basically status to make sure that everyone socialized that these things are happening. In this group, in this slot, we want to talk about issues and then try to help resolve issues. With that, we're going to go to the next slot.
Good morning, everyone. Next on the agenda is the working group document status. We currently have 19 active working group documents. There's one in the RFC ATS queue, one for which we put in a publication request late last week. There were 2 that we finished last call, and we were waiting on updates from the others. As Lou mentioned, there was an update seen for at least one of them. We have 6 working group documents that are on the agenda today, so that leaves us with 9 documents, and we will go over the status of each of those in the next few slides. First up is the ACT and info model. This was published, this was adopted last month. We didn't receive any update, but there were no changes made to the draft since adoption. We would still like to see updates being sent to the list though. Next up is the network assigned upstream label draft. Revision 5 was published early this month. It addressed all the last call comments that were sent in by the document shepherd. At this point in time, there are no pending issues, and the authors believe that the draft is ready for working with last call. Next up is the PC Central Control Architecture document. There was one revision published in December. The authors took care of a few nits that were identified during a review by the authors themselves. The authors believe that this draft is ready for last call. In fact, they believe that it was ready even before adoption. From our point of view, adoption doesn't really mean it's ready for adoption. We would still like to see some discussion happen on the list for the document while it progresses through the working group. After the status report was sent to the list, we did see some discussion happen. The authors have hinted that there would be some changes coming in based on that discussion. There seems to be a desire to add a section on manageability considerations. We would take look at last call consideration after those changes come in. Next up is the PCE as a central controller use case document. Again, no update received for this. The document got adopted early this month. Next is the RSVP egress protection draft. A new rev was published last month. It took care of a few editorial nits. The pre-working group last call IPR poll for this is complete, and we should be taking it to the next step pretty soon. Next is the experimental draft on RSVP ingress protection. The authors did a thorough editorial scrub. It got published last month. Again, the pre-working group last call IPR poll is complete for this, and we should be able to take it to last call immediately after this meeting. Next is the RSVPT scalability recommendations draft. There was a new rev. There were some minor editorial changes. There were a couple of open questions that needed to be discussed on the list. The authors responded to those on the list. So at this point in time, the authors don't believe that there are any pending issues with this, and would like to request last call. Next is the schedule resources draft. There were a couple of revisions for this that were published since last IETF. There were some ID nits and spelling errors that got fixed. A section on multi-domain considerations was added, and also the security consideration section was updated. In terms of next steps for this, the authors have been kind enough to give us 3 choices. One is to wait until the solution documents are adopted by the PC working group. The other is to wait until the solutions reach a certain level of maturity. The last option is to just go ahead with the last call. So at this point, we would like to ask the PC working group to see what they have to say about it.
Didn't ask if anyone had any comments on the other ones. They thought it was last. We're ready for last call.
Julien Beric, PC co-chair. We have the item on the agenda for a PC meeting this afternoon. I've heard that the author of both drafts are trying to merge and to work together, so we hope that we'll have a move forward. We'll have working group to get his view on see what happens next.
Okay, thank you.
So what do you think about this document, the TEAS document? Should we hold it up until you have decided on a direction in your working group? Do you not care about this document from a PCE perspective, a PC working group perspective? Do you have any thoughts on that? Our sort of thoughts were maybe that that first option of wait until you've selected a direction to make sure that we're not radically off base might be a good compromise. You know, we don't want to just have it sit forever. But we also don't want to publish something that is a complete out of alignment with the direction you're going.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think we don't have necessarily to all anything or to be highly strict on which one should come first, provided we are converging toward the same direction. So if we believe that both working groups are going towards the same direction, I'm fine. Whether you want to be first or second, I don't care. But I agree with you, we should avoid to be going
Divergent, yeah.
different directions.
So our inclination is to go with the first. It sounds like that works well from your perspective as well.
Thank you.
Any other input from the working group? So we'll pick the first option.
Last in alphabetical order in this deck is the T metric recording draft. We haven't seen any updates sent to this, sent on the list for this either in this meeting or even for the last meeting we didn't receive any updates. There are still some outstanding comments that were sent out in June last year that haven't been addressed or responded to on the list. Is there anybody from the author side who would care to comment? I don't see anyone coming to the mic. How many of you are still interested in this draft? Can I get a show of hands, please?
So we see a few hands going up.
So if any of you is interested in helping with the editing process, please do reach out to the chairs and we'll hook you up.
Yeah. Basically, the current author set has dropped the ball. So if we want to complete this, we need someone to stand up to pick it up and move the document forward. Is anyone interested in doing that? We'll put you on the spot. Think about it, send us email. We'll also put a call out on the mailing list.
That's all we have in this slide deck. Any questions, comments on the working group document before we?
I think there was one or two documents where the authors suggested that they were ready for last call. Can we switch to those for a moment? So I think this was one of the two. Just pick one. Not this one. We've talked. That one's on the list. So this.
Scaling?
Yeah.
This we are already.
Right. Okay. So scaling. Not sure how many people have read it, but if anyone has any concerns or questions on the document, now is actually a reasonable time to bring them up. I know that's not completely fair because it wasn't on the agenda. We would ask that people do take a look at this document even before the last call and send any comments they have to the list. I thought there was one more that heard we talked about. Okay. The other ones we talked about.
Next up is Shifeng. So this draft and the set of drafts that Tarek would be covering next are covered in the joint session as well. The idea is to focus on items that need working group input and discussion in this session, and then give a general status update in the Friday session.
That's interesting.
Morning.
This one
I'm
should be-
Shifeng from Cable, talking about the young model status, the T topology. Here's a list of authors and contributors. So the changes since last IETF, we did a few modeling changes and added a few features. I won't go through every one of them. Like you said, probably today we'll focus on some discussion topics, and for several modeling status items, I will cover that on Friday. So, a little bit out for the. So here's about supporting tunnel termination points.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. When we transform the topologies, well, when we do abstractions, mergings, and all the other things. So during that process, we'll have the result topology has relationship with the underlay other topologies. So we already have the modeling concepts for the supporting node, supporting links. So in the case on the left side, the big node in AN11, that's the abstract node of the left bottom one topology. So for that one, we have underlay topology. So the on the right side, pretty much one-to-one mapping to the top. We already have the big AN11 that underlay topology that's supporting the abstract node. Inside that, well, what we're missing here is termination points. We also have a relationship between the underlay termination points and the abstract node. Inside of abstract node, the termination points. So here we added the relationship at the modeling concept, those blue triangles, they have the supporting relationship. So we have this added to our model. And this can be between abstract node to underlay, one of the underlay node. Inside that underlay node, if there's a termination point, all could be just a one-to-one mapping on the right side. So the S21 and the S5, they have a one-to-one relationship. So this one will use the supporting node from the I2I space topology, and under that we specify the termination point. So this is modeling change. This will be the model structure change for connectivity matrix, more for the modeling changes. So I skip this, and the same thing here, I skip that. And for the not sharing risk links group, we brought up this during last IETF. The idea is that if we want to request 2 abstract links and ask them no underlay shared risk. So we need to have disjoint underlay. So we need this modeling option. So since then, last IETF mentioned that we were going to implement this. So we modeled that, and we added the NSRG group ID, and each link we can specify which group we belong to. Another change we did here is for the underlay tunnel. If we specify a link, we want to use a particular underlay tunnel, now we can do that. This is also in sync with the TE tunnel model. We work with the TE tunnel model authors, and we got this same kind of IDs, and we have the corresponding relationship, so we know which tunnel is coming, we can use for the underlay. So let's skip that. So here, another topic we talked quite a bit was the multi-layer topology. And I think probably a few sessions ago, we did the support for multi-layer topology. During that presentation, we only did an example with the 2 layers. So then we come up this question about more than 2 layers. And then we talked a lot about that, and so we think the current transformation strategy still works. So here, this is where we do the topology transformation. So on the left side, we have a node which can support 3 layers, and the orange, blue, and green. So when if we use a transitional link, we decompose them into 3 logical nodes, 1 at each layer, and so we keep all the termination points, and we add the few logical link termination points. So we add the link between them from this relationship. We know which one is a transitional link, and we can go through the path computation between layers, then so to get the result at the right side here. Same thing, we have another way to do the multi-layer modeling. So we can use the inter-layer lock approach, and that approach also works. So in this case, we can have this this guy, the tunnel termination points shared by different interlock IDs, and then we can know they are which layer they belong to and how do we do the computation. To support the layers to identify which, because we have multiple client layers now, so we need add a piece of information here to identify which client layer we can support for each tunnel termination point. So for this chapter, we also clarify a few terminologies here. So we have abstract topology, customized topology. They are not same thing. So here we clarify that for the customer topology, we use this client ID to identify which customer this topology is customized to, which may or may not be abstract depending on the situation. And if the topology ID, the customized client ID is 0, which means it's not customized yet, so it's from the provider. So those are major things for the changes since we had since last IETF. And there's something come up with the base topology problem. So there's an issue with the for the HYS base topology model is the one we augmented, and so that model is almost went through the process, went through last call. But there's some discussion now about how do we model the server provided the system generated items. So that this topic will be discussed in the HYS session. So we'll need to adjust our model based on the result of that discussion. So anyone interested can join the HYS session and express their opinions. So next step, we don't have much left over. So we think it's close to the last call. So we hope we can finish that soon.
Hello, my name is Michael Sharp. I work for Nokia. So in general, this works excellent, but when we try to implement this model, we run into a couple of things. And one observation is, I mean, the model is relatively complex. If you have a single layer topology, for example, and we wonder whether it could be made more clear what parts of the model are really needed in the multi-layer case, and what parts of the model are only needed if you have a single layer. I think there's a feature in there in the model, but I think this could be revisited, whether that feature really covers everything.
Yeah.
And the second feedback is, I mean, for example, there are things in there like the statistics. I'm not sure what the use case for this is, so that would be another candidate, for example, for making this optional by a feature or something like that.
Yeah, can you send your some list so we think see we can make a feature also. But also beyond that, we're thinking to have a informational draft to explain how the model will be used.
Yeah,
So
that's something that's
examples,
useful. But as I said, I mean, I'm not asking to change the model or anything,
Yeah.
but I think in some use cases you can simply turn off parts of the model because you don't need it.
Yeah.
And that might simplify, for example, interoperability between different
So each
controllers.
use case will use a subset of
Exactly,
the model.
and I think it would be good to have some documentation of what subset you need in, depending on your use case.
So rather than a separate document, maybe think about putting that in an appendix.
It's already 100 pages long. Do you want to add another 100 pages?
If it really helps people figure out how to implement the simple case, it's probably a worthwhile addition and maybe the only thing people really look at who are implementing that simple case. So it might turn out to be the most useful thing initially. The author does not like that comment. We're not. We both actually had the same thought, but we're not dictating it. If you really wanted a separate document, okay.
Hi, great work, Jing. Packet design, by the way. Great work. I have a question actually. Sometimes the TE tunnel on the layer 3 goes over two optical networks and the underlay, and then these two optical networks connect on client-to-client ports.
Yeah.
And how is that modeled? Actually, I'm not quite
Yeah, we
sure.
do have that, interdomain links, access links. So I think we should put that's one of the example, we should have that on the.
Yeah, it would be great actually if you
Yeah.
explain that. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Fatai from Huawei. So I think actually this draft is very important and it is the foundation of all T-related work. So as an implementer, I really hope that this draft could be published as updates as soon as possible, because we are waiting for the updates to implement our products, you know. So unfortunately that I see there's only one or two open issues. So please take action quickly. And you know, please do not repeat the tutorial things again and again, you know, in lots of the IETF meetings. Yeah, take action. Yeah, thank you.
Igor Buskin, Huawei. So just to answer Michael's and Lou's comments, so we prepared a tutorial which basically first it not just describes topology but also T-tunnel model, because we believe that these two models are very intertwined and very interrelated. And it's a long tutorial, and it's written in a different level, so it's much easier to understand, and it also includes a lot of use cases that covers like a typical use cases. So it would be really helpful, in my opinion, to actually not to mix this into one model where we have like a half of the draft is like a model itself in written yarn. So basically, this was our plan. We want to come up with the informational document with a lot of pictures and a lot of like a model and concept descriptions and use cases. So this will also help in proceeding with this work and basically having like a separate work on this document.
Any other questions?
So
So-
I have a couple of changes for, do you want to continue on that?
I had two questions. So what do you think is going to happen with I2RS? Do you have any feelings about that? What do you think should happen?
My feeling is that probably one way or the other, so they will move forward. So they probably will have some two options here, right? So my feeling is that they're going to the top level split approach, because that's less approach, yes, less resistant from the normal people. So I think this one will be published. So if that's the case, we need to decide what we need to do.
So let's say this happens. What do you, the authors, think will be the right next step?
Then probably we can move all our states into this branch. So that the problem with this kind of approach is that in a few months or a year, when revised data stock comes on, do we want to redo the model again?
So that gets to my next question,
Right.
is what are your thoughts on how to address revised data stores and to transition to that?
Right, that's another topic we cannot.
Well, you
talk
should tell the working group. I may know the answer, but you and I may know the answer, but the working group doesn't know.
Right, so that's a more general question. So probably apply to all the models. I took that the tunnel model example of bring that up to the ITGWG working group. So here, if we use this approach, right, then in a few months, a year, revised data stock comes on, so they give us a migration path. So what the proposal is, you need move everything here to there, and then deprecate this. So which means the model need another revision. We have to publish a new model. Then that's something probably we don't want to do. And another option will be we use like a current the tunnel model we're using. We have split configuration containers and state containers. So if you use that approach, when reverse state store comes down, then what we need to do, we need to drop the duplication in the state container. So after we do that, so we don't need to rewrite, we only need to deprecate the duplications. And after that deprecation, we may have those configuration containers which is not looking very good. So it's not ideal from the final solution, but it works. So it still can be usable. So I think it will be a little bit better, but another option would be we also drop the config container, move everything to the top level. Then if we do that, probably even closer to the ideal solution when the revised data store comes. So but here is what convention we want to use. We can ignore this branch. We can ignore for now. So even though HYS introduced this branch, we can ignore. We continue to use our current ones. Then for the initial version, it's not looking very well. But it works. So, and eventually when the revised data set comes along, we have a better migration path. So I don't know which one would be best. So, but probably want to have the input from working group. Not from TEs or even from RTG, WG, and wider, even NetMod.
So the Fatai, I think, gave us some good direction of our plea to get this work done quickly. We would really like to do that, and there's a lot of good stuff here. But we do have these 2 points that we have to figure out. We rely on the I2RS model. That model has to sort itself out, and then once it's there, we have to figure out how we tie to it and whether we revisit being tied to it. Hopefully that's not the case, but we'll have to figure out that answer once we know what's happening in the I2RS working group. That's part A. Part B that we have to figure out is how to deal with revised data stores. And that's a big question. And I think Shufang's right that this is something that hits many models. And so it's going to be talked about in the routing working group because it affects all models being developed, well, maybe everywhere, but certainly within the area. So we want to come up with a single answer for the area, so we all do it the same way. So stay tuned to that discussion, and if you're interested in Yang models or implementing them, please show up at the routing working group for that discussion.
Pass that discussion and
Sue Harris.
I'll introduce myself. Sue Harris. In this quick case in HAT, I2RS chair. So what would you like to have happen with the I2RS topology model? Just if you had your best possible situation, what would you like to have happen?
Well, I would like to have this kind of approach. So
We
if
would like option number 2.
number 2 or 3. So for I2RS, we have 1, 2, 3, right? So 2 and 3 similar, but anyone will be okay. So if we do that, then the structure, we have single branch. I don't need to change anything.
Okay. And your preference is number 2 over of the 3 options?
Doesn't matter. I
2
don't
or
have
3
that
is
much.
good.
Yeah,
Thank you for your input.
okay.
So based on how the discussions go in I2RS and RTG-WG, plan on giving a summarized report on Friday.
Sure. Okay. I think I can skip this one. This is some modeling changes for other models. But we probably will want to, at some time, to adopt the layer 3 T.
Your time.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes.
Oh, still have fun. So only changes here, we have the, what is one? The layer 3 T topology is that we move back and forth multiple times about the grouping for the performance, the packet related structure. Used to be in the base T topology model, and then because of packet, we move to this extension augmentation T topology packet, that model. But the performance metric could be common. So we got the common thing that this section probably will be better can be shared. So for this revision, we move that into the base T types. So it's not in the base topology model, but it's in the common T types module. So any technology need to have this section, can just either use statement there and then use that grouping. So that's the way we think compromise to different kind of technologies and not pollute the T-based topology. That's about it. So for the SRT, we added the local database based on the changes from the SR model. Okay, we're done.
I'm good. I have a question to the Picket extension.
Yeah.
So sorry, I was not quick enough. So in your previous topology model, you inserted the transitional link. So how do you intend to use it when you apply it for Pickets?
What do you mean by the transitional link?
Transitional link is basically a kind of a logic construct between layers to get from, let's say, one layer to another.
Yeah.
Which is similar to what you do, for example, in MPLS when you put a label on,
Yeah.
because you go from one tunnel to another.
Uh-huh.
So do you intend to introduce or to keep that construct of a transitional link also for MPLS LSPs? Do you want to do something different?
So from basic topology model perspective, right, so this is generic. So it doesn't matter which layers, packet or circuit or optical. So the constructor will be the same. If the packet extension will be needed, so there will be an augmentation at packet. We have label on top of it.
Igor Briskin, just one comment. Label, MPLS label, and transitional links, they are not necessarily the same things. Transitional link, it's a T construct, and it's used, for example, for path computation, multi-layer path computation, and the label is adaptation. Okay, that's what you do into data plane. Okay, so for example, say if you can compute a multi-layer path going from, say, MPLS layer to down layer, using transitional links, and then when actually the tunnel is set up and basically tunnel carrying other tunnels set up, then you use labels. Okay, so one thing doesn't contradict the other.
Well, the way I'm looking at it is essentially from a data plane perspective. It's the same because it's a layering relationship. And that's why I'm questioning a little bit or challenging, let's say, how to make it universal. But I don't want to. I stop here.
Yeah, it's a good discussion, and perhaps one that should be taken to the list while we had time. I think we've used up our time.
Yeah,
You're done. So there were two documents that Shifeng just talked about that were started as part of the base topology piece, but now sort of been split out. They're individual documents. One is the L3 TE topology, and the other one here on the screen is SR TE topology. And the authors are asking for working group adoption. Now, these weren't actually called out on the agenda, our mistake for not doing that. So this may be a surprise to some people that we're talking about these two drafts. How many folks think that it's important to be working on L3 topology representation as well as SR topology representation? Can I see hands? Are you interested in working on these drafts, or the working group working on the drafts? I guess I'll take them individually. Let's do it because, so L3 TE topology, is that something the working group should be working on? It seems like, do we want to do TE here, guys? So we're getting a few people, but maybe it's folks are asleep, but it's a reasonable number, not a huge number. How many people have read this draft? Even less. Where I wanted to head was to see if we could get to support for adoption of these. I think because they weren't called out on the agenda, I think it's a little bit too much of a surprise for the group. So I think we're going to have to discuss this on the list. I mean, we always confirm things on the list, but I think it's a little, we're not going to get good input today.
Igor Briskin, just to put like in perspective. So the discussion could be, do we need these combined modules versus, for example, totally separate modules and having client to subscribe to all of them and pick whatever they want. Okay, that would be a very reasonable discussion.
Look forward to seeing it on the list. Yep. No, seriously, that's great.
Yeah. Tarek?
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good to see you again.
I don't think we can hear you.
Okay. How's now? Can you hear me well? Yeah. Okay, my name is Tarek Saad. I'm going to present an update today on the following 4 drafts. Actually, 3 drafts. The last one will be presented on Friday in the MPLS session. The code for these models is available on GitHub if for ease of extraction from the drafts, and it's pointed, the reference is there. I am presenting on behalf of the authors listed there, and thanks to all. So on my agenda, I'll go over the updates since last meeting, and I'll individually for each draft, I'll present the next steps. For the first draft, a summary of changes that we've done since the last meeting. Let me start off by giving credits. I want to thank everybody who gave us comments and reviewed the model, shared his experience in implementation. So Sergio, Italo, Daniele, and others, I'm sorry if I missed anybody, not on purpose. Thanks again to the co-authors from the multi-vendor team for showing up and continuing the discussions. High-level model changes for this draft. We did further alignments in terms of the leaf names and container names with OC OpenConfig models. We added new leaves, new attributes or parameters to the objects in the model. We replaced some types by the routing defined types, so more generic. We added some extra, again, attributes in the different places in the model, and I'm going to talk in details about them in subsequent slides. So the first update here, we added additional parameters to the tunnel. Specifically, we're talking about the encoding, which will define the nature of the LSP or the technology. We added a preference. So basically, if you have multiple tunnels terminating on the same endpoint, you can define preference, and that can be used for load sharing. and stuff like that. Re-optimization timer, when to re-optimize. The signaling type is basically, we have multiple options. We have RZP signaling, we have segment routing signaling, and we have static provisioned or static label cross connects. So we added this leaf there under the tunnel, and we also added it under per path. So a tunnel can have multiple LSPs instantiated by different signaling protocols. So we saw that as a use case, useful use case. And we also added some IGP shortcut parameters, or renamed them so they're more standardized. The second update was to add attributes of auto bandwidth, well-defined attributes. Third update, we had this explicit route object. We regrouped the V4 and V6 into one choice. And we added this hop type to indicate strict or loose, and it's present in every type or every choice in there. So for the AS number, for the unnumbered link, and for the IP address, obviously. And lastly, we added the SID as an option for indicating segment routing, segment ID type of hop. The fourth update, again, additional parameters or attributes in the path, in the path case, in the tunnel path. Again, I mentioned that we have a path setup protocol, which is the signaling mechanism used to instantiate the LSP. It can be RSVP, segment routing, or static. The computation method, locally computed or externally provided, and possibly the computation server address. We also, for the static LSP provisioning case, we are pointing a reference to an LSP provisioned in the other static LSP model. So in here, we would reference that LSP name. So lastly, some regrouping, shuffling of where the primary paths sit and the secondary paths sit. So minor modification. The fifth update, we added some additional constraints under the named path constraints that are used for path computation. So in addition to the already existent ones, we added a list of route objects to either include or exclude. So the inclusion exclusion is per object itself. And then we added some bandwidth parameter as constraint as well. One point that was raised in the discussion is we need more objective functions, more generic ones. Right now, we are restricted to what is typically implemented by vendors. So more elaborate objective functions are not in the model. So one possibility is to define them in this model and be more generic and to include all the ones well-known objective functions, or define an extended type of model that augments this one, especially that not many vendors implement these objective functions. Next steps, we still have an open action item to complete the RPCs that are needed per tunnel. And we do request, the working group and everybody to review and give us your feedback or implementation experience with the model. That's it on this draft. Next, I'm going to talk about the.
Do you want comments along the way? Do you want them at the end?
No, for the previous one, I'll take them out.
So, any comments, questions?
You mentioned a couple of things which are not really covered in the standards, but are commonly supported by all vendors. It's good to note those, and one of the questions for the authors and for the working group are, should those types of things be features as opposed to sort of required? Because they're not really explicitly defined. They're certainly not precluded. Everyone does those things, so it's perfectly reasonable. And I think that's a good thing to think about when doing the review. I'm not going to say that there's a hard and fast rule, but it's a good thing to think about. People can always do deviations, of course.
Yeah, it's a good comment. Yeah, I wouldn't say struggled, but we went into discussions of which of the items should be protected by if feature checks. The approach we took is if most of the vendors on the call would have it implemented, we wouldn't have the feature check, but it's an open item for discussion.
Yeah, and certainly that's something that we can even revisit at last call. It's not a big deal to add that. It's not a fundamental change. But if for some reason, when you get wider review, if you get some pushback, we can always revisit those calls. The other thing is, please keep in mind which things belong in data plane specifics. If I'm not mistaken, bandwidth, for example, auto bandwidth is really an MPLS data plane specific thing, and I think it's in the general model, right?
Right.
So like that really is in the wrong place. Yeah. So that we've got to go back and reread that now that the documents are settling in their various forms to make sure that we have the common pieces in the right place and the technology pieces in the right place.
Good comment. Thank you for pointing it out.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next, the RSVP model. So this model is being split into multiple drafts now. We are grouping the generic RSVP and base and extended in one draft, the first draft. The RSVP-TE one generic again will be in a separate draft, and the MPLS portion will be in the third draft. Now we think this is one approach. If the working group thinks that too many drafts or they have a different arrangement for the models or the drafts, please share with us. So it's not our intention to make a lot of drafts, but this is how it turned out to be. Okay, so summary of the changes. We did split the draft as is now into two new documents, and there is a plan to add the third one, as I pointed out. The first one contains the base and extended Yang model module definition, and the second one will contain the RZPT generic module. The MPLS that will be created now will contain the MPLS portion of the module. And we did some additional model changes that I will go through in the subsequent slides. So for the RSVP model, we added some additional session attributes. So the path state blocks, the reservation state blocks, these are standard type of things defined in RFC 2205 and 3209. Again, some additional attributes under the neighbor list. We also introduced a kind of a back pointer, if you want to call it, from the LSP-TE LSP model to the RSVP session. So this ties the TE LSP to a RSVP session when it's signaled using RSVP. So these are two models basically being tied using this reference or leaf ref. So in terms of next step, the RSVP base and extended model defined in this draft, we think it's stable and ready for working group last call. Again, we also welcome any comments from reviewers on that. And we also welcome more comments on the other drafts that we're publishing with new revisions now. Any comments or questions on these three drafts?
Hi, this is Dhruv. I have one question regarding the bandwidth type. Can you summarize to the group what was because we saw that recently you guys changed, there is RT types bandwidth, IEEE float 32, then there is one in MPLS-T types also. So when I was reading, I was quite confused. What is the consensus that we have? Which is the bandwidth type we are supposed to use in MPLS-T?
Right. So, yeah, I hope I have an example there. Yeah, so there is this specification type. We termed it as bandwidth type. Maybe not the best way, but it's basically statically assigned or automatically generated using, collection of incoming traffic and adaptation or auto bandwidth type of. And then there is the IEEE float bandwidth data type. So this is defined in the routing document. So this is not a kilobit kind of, this is just statically assigned or automatically or dynamically generated.
Okay, so when we are configuring, we want to use this type, but when it is generated or measured, we want to use the float 32 one.
Right, so you would want to set this is static, and that means, that's it. This is how much I'm requesting the signal. But then you assign the value as set bandwidth here with kilobits per second.
Thank you.
All right, no problem.
Why not use the same type in all cases?
Yeah.
I mean, you still could, right?
Not, okay, unless I misunderstood your question, but.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding the answer.
What I'm trying to say is, when you specify a bandwidth value using the unit defined in the routing group, you want to say this is static or dynamic, and that static dynamic is kind of an ENA. I mean, it's separate from the value of the.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were saying that you have two types of bandwidth, ways of representing bandwidth. My mistake.
I think we went over those. Yeah, that was it for the RSVP and TE models. For the MPLS model, I'll be presenting that on Friday, just so that I don't chew all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. You gave us 3 minutes. Extra back. Next is ACT framework. No, just be on time. You can steal his 3 minutes.
Good morning, Daniele, giving a very short overview of the oldest ACTN drafts, the requirements and the framework. The framework, if you have been following the mailing list a little bit during the last weeks, was a subject of quite intense discussion, which in my opinion, at least, contributed to improve the quality of the draft significantly. There were two main reviews, the one carried out by Adrian, thanks for doing that, the other one from Michael. There are a lot of, we tried to collect all the main things that have changed in the draft, but some changes were really specific, so it was kind of difficult to collect all of them. Just to mention some of them, I would say the fact that we tried to make some clarity between the OSS role, the PNC role, the NMS role, all the different pieces and components in the ACTN architecture. So specifying also what is the role of the PCE inside of a potential PCE as a centralized controller in the ACTN hierarchy. We updated the reference to the NF architecture, things like this. Maybe the most significant ones were the adding of a section dedicated to abstraction, which is a little bit pointing at the document on abstraction that you will see after. And the policies. Here, thanks a lot to Dana for contributing an entire new section on policy management, and so on and so forth. And what else? This is it for the framework. Now, well, it was widely reviewed, so it might be good timing for moving the document to the last call, probably as well as the requirements draft, which is even older and even more stable in terms of time compared to the framework. Once again, thanks a lot to Adrian for a very careful and detailed review of the document. As Adrian says, a draft is ready not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to cut. And we have cut one session and a half. So it means that also this document did a significant improvement in terms of quality. Again, a lot of minor updates. Maybe the ones that are worth being mentioned are the split of the requirements between the service-specific ones and the network-related requirements. And this is it also for the requirements draft. Again, a pretty stable and discussed draft that could be ready or not.
Yes, my name is Michael Sharp from Nokia. So you mentioned that this document is pretty old.
And it doesn't mean it's out of date.
Yeah, but for example, in the review from the first one, we identified that there could be additional interfaces, such as the MMI, which is not mentioned at all in this document. So this document dates back 2005. Isn't there a need to think about the state of the art of industry in 2017?
Okay, so maybe I didn't get to what
specific comment is that there's a new interface in the framework, the MMI, which is not covered in this draft.
Okay.
And that is related to quite a bit of other discussion, how ACTN architecture in general looks like, what the role of the CMI is, how recursion works and all this. And this is all not in this document.
Actually, yeah, you're right. Actually, I thought that we agreed that the MMI was not needed, but...
No, okay, then let's be clear. We do not agree to this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about this requirement document,
I think the framework.
You're talking about framework or requirement?
I'm specifically talking about the requirement one, because in the framework one, I think the MMI was added, but it's missing in this one. But if you add it here, the question is how the document as a whole looks like. That's unclear to me.
Yeah, I think one answer is MMI is just a special case for MPI. So in the requirement level, we don't want to specify that detailed technology specific thing.
I need to correct my reply because I thought you were speaking about the framework. I don't think from a requirement perspective, we need to say we need also the MMI. I mean, from a requirement perspective, you say what you want to do with an SCTN architecture. Then in the framework, you say, I need this and this and that.
Again, as I said, I disagree on that. And I also think there's ambiguity in some of the things here. So, because in a lot of the discussions that we have and that we will have probably later in the session, is I think it's not exactly clear, for example, what the CMI is about. There's, I think, confusion on that. And the requirements would be one way to address that, but I don't think that it does a good job on that right now. So in certain cases, yes, it's clear, but I think things come up. And in this case, I think this document might have to be reviewed, looking at the state of the industry in 2017.
Igor Briskin, I actually wanted to ask a question about the framework. So I agree with you and I agree with Dan that policy framework is extremely important for ICTN. Okay, I think it will not work at all if we will not have like policies that operators can in a free way express their basically preference as to how the ACTN controller should behave. So my question, what are the next steps with the policies? Okay, so for example, which working group we are going to use, and are we going to develop, for example, or ask somebody to develop a declarative language for such policies?
I think this is a good topic maybe for the applicability draft, where we tried to put together a collection of the different pieces that we need that we can pick from existing work and a sort of gap analysis of what is missing and what needs to be added. Maybe that's the right place to address this issue.
So the SUPA guys, the SUPA working group, has been contacting various draft authors about whether or not the work that they're doing is applicable to the policy work that's in their document. So I'm not endorsing that. I'm just saying that that working group is, I think, looking for users. So that might be worth looking at to see what they're doing and whether it's at all helpful.
Totally agree with that. That's why we have put the anchor in the framework, and then we need to start working on that. We are far from being done from that point of view.
Yeah, this is Yang. Regarding Michael's question, I think we can add specific to MPI and MMI on the requirement document if that's what you want. And then please provide your feedback.
Yep.
Especially, I think Sergio had some idea about technology specific thing. But I think framework, I think we already mentioned on a high level. And then I think we need to separate requirement from framework. And I think we want to ask for working group last call, at least for the framework at this moment.
So on the, I have a comment on each document. On the requirements, one thing that's not clear, I actually read it again just sort of with the anticipation that you're going to ask for working group last call. And it occurred to me that it's not clear where those requirements apply. Like, are these requirements on operators who use a solution? I hope the answer is no, but you could read it that way. Or is it on the solutions being developed that they provide the tools to the operators, and then the implementations can configure those, whether those functions are being provided? It's probably closer to that, but the document needs to be clear on where the requirements apply. On the framework, and I actually thought Michael was going to take us there, and thinking about where the state of the industry of where we are in 2017 and how they evolved, the notion of controllers and orchestration is really well understood now. And we had some
Controller is, orchestration is not.
Well, so what we're doing here, as I see it, is multi-domain orchestration, TE orchestration. To me, that's really what ACTN is all about.
If you correctly remember, when we decided the name for the MDSC, we went for coordinator and not orchestrator.
I know. But you also have the same guys who are authors on the framework have written this other document that we talked about at the last meeting, and we're going to hear about in a slot or two, that actually has some really nice mapping between some of those more regularly understood or more transparent industry terms and the terminology we're using. And maybe that terminology could be part of this update to 2017, is bring that, you're the same set of authors, bring your text from one document and bring it into the framework so that someone who's coming afresh to ACTN can put it into terminology that the rest of the industry understands. And you already have the text. And it's just sort of bringing stuff together and giving a more coherent and relevant repackaging of the technology.
Yeah, that's exactly true, from my opinion. I think this is really TE orchestration these days. And if you talk to customers about the ACTN architecture, nobody understands those terms. So that's just the feedback that I can give. So everybody talks about domain controller orchestration. Everybody understands these days what this means. And ACTN terminology is very specific in that context. So it's really worthwhile to think about this. But as I said, as part of this, it could also impact the architecture, because we have a better understanding these days how these things really work.
Yeah. And that's actually a really good point. I had a conversation at the newcomers group with some folks that are work for carriers, and they said, "Oh, what do you do with T's?" I said, "Traffic engineering." "Oh, we do that. That's good. What are you working on?" "We're doing ACTN to do," and I started throwing in some jargon, and they're like, "Huh?" And I said, "Well, we're doing orchestration of TE services across multiple domains with domain controllers." "Oh yeah, we need that. That's great." So
Yeah, actually, there is also plenty of our FIs asking for a CTN. I mean, it's not a totally new.
May I take a comment from Michael? I think you are the one who says orchestration is abused term or it's not clear term to get out of that term out of the framework. First of all, that's what your comment, one of the comments, that's why we eliminate what orchestration words out of the framework, first of all. And second is, I think it was a judicious decision why we put coordination as opposed to orchestration, and then we qualify what we mean by MDSC in terms of functions. So I think, it was, and orchestration itself still, a lot of people have different idea.
Yeah, let me be clear. I'm not
Yeah.
saying do string replace. I'm not saying that.
You're
I'm
not
saying
saying that.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting renaming everything.
Okay.
What I'm saying is help people understand the mapping between these terms to the terms that ACTN uses.
Yeah, which is, we have another draft that how.
Exactly.
it's
So
gonna
I'm saying
present.
take that draft.
Okay, good.
Take those words and put them as part of the framework and that I think will help to address Michael's comment about being relevant to 2017.
Yeah, I think we can do that, yeah.
That's okay. As part of the working group last call comments, maybe.
As part of getting ready for last call. How's that?
That's right. Okay, now we have a slot with the two drafts to be presented. I think I'll give an overview of the abstraction draft while Aomian will provide an update on the applicability.
What was the name of it?
The next slot.
I know, I just don't know the number. The 6 maybe is it 6?
Or six.
Yeah, 6.
Thank you.
No. 5.
Yeah, right.
5.
It's the name of the file. Unfortunately, we have it by file name as it was submitted, so I have to figure out what file name it was submitted under. Maybe. Give me 1 second.
Yes. Yeah, applicability abstraction, the name of the file.
I must be blind. Let's see. It didn't get downloaded for one moment. I'm just going to go get it from the material page. Abstraction? No, it's 5.
What is Matt?
Yeah, we probably could make use of the secretary, actually. Is that it? Yeah.
I'll do the abstraction first, and then we will go back to the applicability. Okay, as I said, we are in between. Can you fix this? Thanks. Okay, very short update on the abstraction draft. So to leave more time to Aomian to speak about the applicability document. Actually, we we started working on this document just to make some clarity, but it turned out to be pretty useful. We received a lot of feedbacks, a lot of comments saying that it was at least needed to sort out some fog that was mostly around the terminology. A very short recap on the terminology. We defined the white topology as the one with no abstraction at all. Everything that is in the network is presented in the network topology. The black, which is exactly the opposite, no information at all. It could be just a virtual node, the domain represented as a virtual node, as just a set of border nodes, and then any shade of gray in between, meaning two options, basically. The first one, having the PNC presenting a gray topology based on configuration, based on policies, and so on and so forth. So possibly using abstraction algorithm running on the white topology and presenting the gray topology. Or the other option, which is augmenting the topology step by step, which means you start with a gray topology, and the MDSC, by means of path computation requests, can start to ask the PNC for connectivity information with the T constraints. Like, for example, what can you give me between A and B with these characteristics in terms of bandwidth, delay, and so on and so forth. Going back specifically to the updates of this version, actually, we added some text to define which is the scope of the draft, what I said right now. And then there were some concerns about the usage of the term abstract node, which is now fixed. We agreed that virtual node is probably the right term to identify a domain represented with black topology. Connectivity was another term that was used not in a proper way, and these have been fixed too. So in this case, the number of changes was a little bit less than the other documents. So once again, thanks for the comments, thanks for the interest, and as we said, we can copy a lot of good tests from this draft and put it into the framework.
Igor Briskin, I have two questions. So white topology, basically we are saying that PNC exposes topology just like it knows about its network.
Just like, sorry, eh?
Like the controller knows it himself. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So provided that this topology elements have like a number of proprietary extensions. Okay. So how does this white topology helps to the client?
You don't make it white.
Okay, right. So basically, white is not really applicable for this use case because of these proprietary extensions.
In this use case, you want, unless you have an MDSC that understands your proprietary extensions, you are suggested not to use them and go for a gray.
So right. So the similar question about black topology. So
yes.
If I present myself just a domain, like unconstrained domain, okay, I basically say nothing because outside world already knows about links coming in and out to my domain, yes. And it just assumes as much, right? That these links could be switched over this domain in free unconstrained way.
Yes, actually, in that case, you give the reference of the border nodes in the sense that you say, look, these are the 10 border nodes. Mm-hmm. I'm available to reply to your requests, meaning you can send path computation requests, stateful, stateless, whatever you want. And I can tell you, okay, you can go from A to B with 10 milliseconds of delay, and I can give you 100 gigabits.
So it's not a black topology then, it's kind of gray.
It's a black that becomes gray. It's the second option I I spoke about before.
So the bottom line is that basically neither totally white nor totally black topologies are useful, and there are only different shades of gray that will be useful, right?
Yes. From a terminology point of view, we need the white and black to define gray.
So we are starting to run tight on time. You have one comment in there I think it's important to ask follow-up on. You said there's a lot of good text here that should move to the framework document. Great. Is there any text left once you do that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's a lot of good text.
You said a lot of the text could go to the framework. I'm accepting that. Once that's done, is there anything left? Or is that just the whole do you want the whole document to move in?
Anything left in this document?
Yes, the abstraction document.
I would say that all these I'm sorry. I said that there is a lot of good. I said something wrong. The good
maybe I heard something
sorry,
wrong.
sorry,
I mean, it's
sorry.
possible I heard
The
it
good
wrong,
test
but
that
it's
we
on
taken is
tape.
from the applicability draft,
Yes.
Yeah,
not
I think
the abstraction draft.
right, Lou. I think the terminology gray, black, those things I think we need to bring to the framework, which we have in a proper place. But there are other text that is useful as an informational consideration. Make sure that people understand on the same page.
It would be good, if it's not the whole document, it would be good to understand what portion you want to move into the framework. Probably maybe just send a message to the list saying from this document, we want to move these sections into the framework.
Right.
Any comments?
Okay.
If you want to say you want to merge the whole document, that's also acceptable. That's what I was going to ask feedback from the room, but
Yeah, that's
let's do it on the list.
That's not intent of the authors, but we're going to move some terminology into the.
Let's do it on the list.
Okay.
Your previous comment was about the text regarding orchestration.
I'm reacting to your presentation just now,
Okay.
where you ended saying there's good text that can move to the framework. I thought it was on the draft you were presenting on, not his draft.
Okay.
We're behind, so
Minutes?
how many minutes?
-3.
Yeah, -2.
Okay, I will try to be brief. This is Mian from Huawei, and I'm going to introduce an update for the draft on applicability of young models for APTN. And here, well, firstly, I briefly introduce the purpose of this draft. As we all know that there are some existing models defined in the IETF and ongoing models and some modeling under development. So we are trying to link this kind of models into the ACTN framework and architecture to specify how to use this kind of models in the ACTN architecture. So we are also trying to provide a kind of summary and guideline for how to use IETF models. And this draft was initiated in Seoul meeting, and this time the main update is we add more specific young models, including the performance monitoring telemetry one, and we also clarify the text with the path computation and VN service. So we also give some editorial change. And so in these two slides, we are going to show a brief list about how many, which models can be applicable on the three interface of ACTN, that is CMI, MPI, and SPI from top to bottom. So on the first interface, CMI, there are totally 5 different models that's applicable on that interface, including the transport service request, VN request, VN service request, VN initiation, path computation, and performance monitor telemetry. We also specify the difference between the VN service request and the path computation request, because they are requesting different stuffs. And after CMI, there are also mapping between the MPI to the young models, including some generic T stuffs and also some generic young models in net model and TIS working group. So the functionalities can be divided into configuration, task computation provisioning, topology tunnel, and service provisioning. And on the SPI is not the first emphasis of the ACTN, but there are quite a few technology-specific young models in the CCAM working group, and we assume they are applicable on this interface. So we also want to summarize some open issues according to previous discussion. The first one is according to Lou's previous comments, the terminology in this draft will be aligned with the ACTM framework, but we also appreciate that not renaming all the stuff. And the objective is to use this draft as a guideline to understand the young model that we can applicable to the ACTM scenarios. And finally, there was also discussions on the MMI, which between two different MDSs. If this is it is confirmed that this interface is required, so we can do the mapping and corresponding text description. So we talked with some different experts and get some positive feedback, and we assume this effort is useful. So we are trying to request for WG adoption, and after that we can work together on this stuff. That's all. Thank you.
So my name is Michael Schorf from Nokia. If you look at the Yang modules for the CMI interface, and if you think about adding technology specifics, isn't there a huge overlap with other working groups, in particular if you deal with packet technology? Because we have the BES working group, we have the L2SM working group, we have the L3SM working group, all of them define virtual networks that are technology specific, and it's not exactly clear to me why you don't address that in this document.
Well, this is a very good point. I think the motivation for this draft is not to restrict any model applicability. But,
yeah, but the question is why is there any need for new Yang modules, which this draft seems to imply and which I don't agree to.
I think that is a part of Yang coordination, and we will try to change this if the IETF Yang structure change.
And I think from a procedural perspective, it would make sense first to agree whether there's a need for new Yang modules, then documenting them here in this document.
Okay, thank you.
I will try to answer that question.
Thank you.
Hi.
And if you can squeeze a couple of minutes out from the next two presentations.
Not a problem. So this is TE and service mapping Yang model. I hope with this presentation we can answer some of the questions that were just asked. There is actually an ACT and VN Yang that I'm supposed to present next that can also answer the question of why we need a CMI specific Yang model, which was just asked. So just hold that question for a minute. So what is this model? This model, we are trying to make sure that we can map between the service models like the L3SM and the L2SM service model. Those are the service model that the customer would use to set up these kind of services. But if the services need traffic engineering tunnels to be established to meet the requirement of the service model, then we are trying to make a mapping between this is the L3SM service that the customer requested, and this is the T tunnels or the VN Yang that we have created. So with the ACT and VN model or the T tunnel model, we can maintain a mapping between the services. So this is just a very simple model. It doesn't try to define something new. It just maintains the references to the T part and the service part so that we can have a clear mapping between the two. Where do we need it? Especially if the customer wants to just worry about the service and he wants to just focus on the L3SM part, gives us the QoS, give us the traffic engineering parameters, we can do a seamless setup of and handling of a tunnel behind the scenes of the service. So we can have a seamless control and management of VPN tunnels. So which can, we have two modes, which I will describe in the next slide, that whether we want a complete slice isolation in which we can create a dynamic set of T tunnels only for the requirement of a particular service, make sure we have a binding so that it cannot be used by anybody else. Or it could be a simple case of, I want this VPN service, I will use whatever set of tunnels available based on some policy consideration, and you don't have to establish a new tunnels, but I need to maintain a mapping between which tunnels were actually selected for a particular VPN. And this is basically core, this is aligned to the overall ACTN architecture and the functions that we define, whether it is a customer mapping and translation function, or having a virtual service and a virtual network concept. So what are the two mode of operations? The tunnel binding, the VN or tunnel binding mode, or the selection mode. So in the binding mode, the customer comes and says, using the L3SM YANG as an example, that I would like to establish a VPN service. It identifies the VPN sites, it identifies the QoS, all the requirements, and we can use the ACT and VN YANG or the tunnel model YANG to map the service requirements into the TE requirements, and use the existing YANG models to establish, and use the mapping YANG model only to maintain the mapping relationship, not to redo things, but just a mapping reference to this L3SM is used using these set of new TE tunnels that I have just created. And this also allows easy operations that to the outside, the customer may only use an L3SM model, and internally we can use the models tunnel models that we are defining to auto provision and dynamically create them. And the customer may not have to focus on that. But when he cares about what are the tunnels, what are the properties, then he can also find the reference and get more details from the tunnel model and the VN model. And as you know, we also allow bindings on the device. There is a possibility to bind a particular VPN to a tunnel so that those tunnels are not used for any other purposes. The second case is where we allow the set of tunnel YANG or via some other mechanisms, tunnels are already created. Now, when the L3SM is established, what are the tunnels that the device has actually selected? The mapping between the two can also be maintained in the VN tunnel selection mode. So this is just the sample flow that kind of explained. You get the L3SM, you find out what are the sites from the VPN, map it to the tunnels, the P routers and the tunnel endpoints that we have, use the ACTN or the TE tunnel mechanisms to establish end-to-end tunnels and maintain a mapping between the L3SM and this at the MDSC mode. So right now, as you know, we have a clear idea of the service model. We have a clear idea of the device model, but the network part of the L3 VPN is not yet defined in the IETF, but we are working on the process so that we have a clear L3 VPN network model as well, where this model again can be used to maintain the mapping at the MDSC level, at the DNC level, or at the device level. So this is basically how the mapping looks. You have a simple mapping which either maintains an L3SM or L2SM. In case a new service comes, this model can be easily augmented by adding new types of services. And what are the T tunnels or ACT and VN that basically this service is using, that mapping can be maintained. Right, so anything, yeah. So this is basically a simple model. You have two parts. One is mapping.
You have to speed up. You have to speed up a little. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I think I just 1%. So this is the service mapping between the service and the TE, and the site mapping that is in L3 VPN reference or in L3SM draft or L2SM draft. How do they identify the sites? Mapping between the sites and this. So basically, all the technology specific stuff will remain in these models. It will not come in the mapping part. Mapping, we are just maintaining a reference between the two. Yes, so next step, is it useful? Continue to enhance, more comments, thank you.
Igor Bruskin, I think this basically mapping is too simplistic, in my opinion. Okay, because there's no like a one-to-one mapping between layer 3 SM model and tunnels using by this layer 3 service. Okay, so for example, exact same VPN service could come from client A, and provider can say, no, I don't want to put any more resources at all. For another one, I can just readjust bandwidth of my previously provisioned tunnels. For third one, I can create new tunnels. And for fourth, even I can go and reconfigure transport layers, okay? So the only way you can do this is through very versatile policy model. Okay, it is not one-to-one. You cannot just statically envision how basically the operator would want to bind this layer 3 service to the tunnels. So basically what I'm saying is that in my opinion, the best way to go is to produce a declarative language in which the operator can actually express its preferences as to how this mapping should be done, not in a static YAN model.
Let me try to clarify this a little bit. So right now, in the 0.0 version, we have a single map type, and via this map type, we were doing what you are asking policy. I know it's not an exhaustive list, and you gave very good examples. The question is, do we want to go it as a policy way, or do we want to maintain a sort of like a map type and try to list these are the possible ways in which I would like to map the L3 VPN to the set of T tunnels. Whether I want complete isolation, maybe for network slicing kind of concept, please set up a new tunnels, or you are free to reuse. Right now in the draft, we have only 2, but if there are more modes, I hope we can add it at the map type rather than go on the policy route.
So my point is that you cannot envision what policies, what actually operator would want to do. Say, I don't want a policy, I want layer 3 service to set up because it's just Dhruv, you know, I hate his guts, basically, or whatever. No, basically, you need to have like a language in which it's like a abbreviated English in which you can say, you know, I want to do this and this kind of mapping.
My personal opinion is there is a space for both of these. Nobody's saying that policy should not be there, but is policy the only way to do this? That's where we are deciding. That if at least the basic sets, binding, selection, the few things that we can envision, that we can put it as map type. And of course, as you know, in Yang, you can always augment. And if policy comes in the picture, we can use the map type to enhance the policy in future, rather than wait for the policy way as the only way to do this.
So if you do not, for example, envision a concrete policy, so this means that I will have to come up with new augmentation.
Yes.
My name is Michael Schraub for Nokia. So I'm not sure if I fully understand the use case for this, because I mean, L3SM has been defined by network operators, and they've not defined that mapping that you come up here. So it's not exactly clear to me from an operator perspective what the use case for this is. Having said this, just as a heads up, in particular in the L3SM case, it can be way more complex because you can have multiple AS and things like this. And in this case, the mapping to T tunnels can be way more complex than what you have in the model so far. And to be honest, in my point of view, it could be an internal function. It's not exactly clear to me why you need a Yang model at all. Thanks.
Okay. Let me try to answer that question. Do I have anything?
Only if you're taking from the next presentation.
I can manage a little bit. So because that we have presented before, this is the first time I'm presenting that. So the idea there would be that this model at MDSC level, when you are envisioning an end-to-end tunnel, for example, if you're using an L3SM and you have a seamless MPLS case, and you have a end-to-end tunnel established, we will try to map to that end-to-end, and via that, use the T tunnel and other mechanisms to have the underlay also maintained. So that relationship is already well documented in the other Yang model. At the top level CMI, I'm able to map, these are the customer sites, and this is the end-to-end T tunnel that I have, or this is the set of VN, which is a collection of VN members I have. So that kind of relationship, especially what happens is if you only use an L3SM model, you have given the requirements, but you are not able to visualize how the transport, what are the, it is behaving. This is the model via which at the service layer, he can figure it out. Okay, you gave me this, but what are the set of tunnels? What are the properties of those tunnels? If I want to monitor them, I have a clear idea. These are the tunnels that were uses. Let me put telemetry and other things on that and get more information. So that way we envision that this would be useful.
Yeah, but for that, I mean, we could think that it doesn't belong in something like a successor of L3SM. And the other technical comment is if you have multiple AS, you have to definitely think about if you have one or multiple MDSCs.
Yes.
And as we discussed before, it affects the architecture because multiple MDSCs is something that seems to be open. Because you definitely have to understand whether you have one MDSC per AS or not. In the layer 3 VPN case, if it crosses multiple AS. So the use case is valid to some extent, but it challenges the whole AC10 architecture in my point of view. And I'm not sure if this is the right solution.
Okay, let's
You can
take this
respond.
offline. I think I'll be able to convince you. So, move to the next.
Is it related to the? Yeah, let's correct. You can send me in your responses on this.
Thank you. So the next we have the ACT and VN Yang. This we had presented, I think, in the last meeting as well. So I will
So
focus
3
on-
minutes.
Yeah, I will focus on the updates that we had made. Just a very quick, this is basically the CMI interface where the object is that we can have an ability to group a set of TE tunnels to make a VN where it is as a set of VN members or as a abstract topology as well. So we added a clear section talking about why do we think that we need a VN YANG. The idea would be, especially if you take the L3SM example in what we just talked, the customer will talk in terms of set of endpoints, a set of sites and the kind of topology, whether it is hub and spoke or full mesh they want. So this is a way for us from the tunneling side to give them that view that you care about a topology or a virtual network slice. We can give you interfaces and the YANG model which is talking in the same terms. And then when you execute them, you can execute them together. I want this full VN or I want the whole VN optimized, not just in terms of a single tunnels and single path one after the other. So that is the advantage that we get when we combine this into a VN model. It's basically the network slicing kind of requirement and those things are easily met when we talk in terms of VN rather than simple tunnels. Though tunnels are still useful, if the end customer is talking about 2 points, he should use the tunnel model, there's no issue. But when the customer wants to talk in terms of VNs, this is a model that can help us. In the framework and requirement draft, it talks about a special case of multi-source, multi-destination, which is a DC kind of use case where we have a choice between various endpoints to pick. And if we use the VN model and pass those requirements for MDSC to track, we get a very easier way to manage this requirement rather than just doing it without this model, which will require mustable path computation APIs, which will require tracking, which will put the requirements for the client to handle rather than MDSC, which can handle this in a much better way. So based on those requirements, we feel that having a VN model is quite useful and it helps provide a better view to the customer. This is not to say that the tunnel model cannot be used or path computation API does not have a place. Both the models exist and have validity. So the main updates are adding the justification, making sure that we have a reference to the TE topology TP, as well as the bandwidth part, reference to the abstract topology. So most of the things, we are reusing the existing models. We are not trying to redefine it, but basically allow us to have a grouping of a VN and talk in terms of VN and VN member list, which again points to the tunnel models, etc., where the actual details are present. We also make sure that we can support the use case of multi-source, multi-destination, objective functions, metrics, etc., which are not per tunnel, but for the whole VN. So that's the main reason why we feel that this kind of YANG model is quite useful to implement. We also have the pre-computation, the VN compute mode. That's the details of that. Again, it has input and output. So what's the next step? There is, we'll continue to enhance. There are a few things that we know are missing in the model. We need to make sure that we are well aligned with the tunnel model and the topology model as well. And as well as the info model, which is recently adopted. We have to make sure that we are aligned. Questions?
Yeah. A really short question, Igor Boris. So basically, 2 IETF ago, I made the same comment. At last, IETF, Shufan did the same. Basically, we still didn't get the answer. What is the difference between VN model and abstract topology model?
I feel I have answered that question. But
No. You keep saying about tunnels and stuff like that, and multi-source, multi-destination. But for example, abstract topology in its own can address all these things and could be reconfigurable at any time.
So I do agree that it would be good to answer that and to understand it, but I think we have to do it on the list. That was an outstanding action from the last meeting. Before presenting this at the next meeting, please have the discussion on the list of exactly where Igor was going.
Thank you.
Hello, Young, if you don't mind, like 7 minutes.
I'll try.
Maybe 8.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is about young models for key performance index telemetry and some network autonomics, which is basically scaling configuration mechanism. So basically, we have the use cases for this particular requirement. I think SHU, they put some performance monitoring requirement. They want to dynamically control, being able to create, modify, and monitor and optimize. And they want to monitor network traffic key performance index, not the nitty-gritty details of OAM, but this is just LSP level, like latency and bandwidth. And another important thing is the scalability of performance data. They don't want to get bombarded with thousands of data on the fly, and they want to kind of reduce the amount of data as customer would be able to see those things. So it basically supports performance telemetry data and scaling intent. We basically have two young modules within this draft. One is called TKPI telemetry that provides T-tunnel level performance monitoring. Another one is ACT&T telemetry that provides virtual network level and more aggregated performance telemetry. So those two models are specified. Basically, TKP telemetry model augments T-tunnel state with performance attribute. We kind of define a little bit small sets to begin with. And then it uses young push notification and subscription mechanism, which is well defined in that draft. And then scaling intent configuration for auto scaling and auto scale out based on the performance monitored attribute is also specified here. And likewise, on a higher level, more aggregated level, we also define ACT&T telemetry that augments VN state as well as individual VN member on a high level, and use the same young push mechanism for notification and subscription mechanism. And scaling intent configuration is also VN level, and it can be from VN member to VN, and also per domain tunnel to and then VN member. So this is the first model, KPI telemetry young model. We define telemetry data in that container, which basically augments the key tunnel state, and then we specify some high-level parameter here. And then we put some scale intent and condition mechanism. And then likewise, same thing on the ACT&T telemetry young model, which is higher level abstraction. We have scaling intent as well as telemetry data, like a delay variation packet loss bandwidth, but on a higher level than just the T tunnel. And here we define also VN member level, and then VN level configuration and VN member level configuration as well. Given the time, also this is, so we put some telemetry subscription example using young push, basically a subtree. I want to look at certain data within that container. I want to look at, for instance, latency and bandwidth utilization in particular. So you can subscribe to it, and then client can only look at those streaming data as opposed to big data, so to speak. So this is kind of basically idea between CNC and MDSC. CNC can configure a group operation. Say I want to look at delay and bandwidth utilization of my virtual networks, for instance, and then customer can subscribe to MDSC, and MDSC basically translate that to what a PNC can understand on the domain level, and then domain level can be also propagate down to device model. And then basically MDSC gets this virtual telemetry data that is kind of grouped together, utilization bandwidth across different segments of the domain level, and then you can put it together as an end-to-end tunnel, and then it can associate with other telemetry as a group, not just utilization, but also delay, whatever within the confines of this container. So basically, so this is the first crack at telemetry. A lot of people talk about telemetry, but we feel that customers really want KPI of the higher level. They don't necessarily broke down to detailed link level. So this is kind of providing the first crack at based on the requirement and the use case. And we have a T level, and the VM level and VM member level, so different kind of level, and then scaling mechanism on each level. That's basically the scope of this work.
My name is Michael Schraub from Nokia. So one thing that I was surprised is I didn't find telemetry in the requirement document. So that's why I think that this would be one example where the requirements could maybe be outdated. Having said that, quite a bit of the things that you've shown are, to me, technology specific. And that's why I get a little bit confused. Yeah, packet loss, for example. That's technology specific to some extent. So
what is technology specific here? This is a generic SLA type of model.
Yeah, but packet loss.
Yeah, this argument, I think, yeah.
So the key confusion is to which extent is the CMI technology agnostic, technology specific, and I think the examples that you've shown here contribute to this confusion, at least to me, because this is packet technology stuff.
No, that's the customer. It's not packet technology. Customer know delay and then packet loss, that language they speak in SLA. So it's not really technology specific. Without that, there's no basis. I argue against that.
Yeah. So just to add to what Michael said, right? So basically, in the tunnel model and topology model, we already defined counters, and we didn't finish that, but we defined all the counters that we think will be necessary for collecting telemetry information, and this could be done first on any abstraction level, on physical level, on any abstraction level, like abstract node, abstract link, domain, and such like that. Right, and it is also very nicely fit into the technology-specific things. Right, for example, for optical layer, you will have different telemetry information than for packets. Right, so basically, this is essentially the same question. We think that we covered the telemetry collection in the basic models. Okay,
Yeah,
why do we need another?
So it would be good to do a matching exercise to see where there's a mismatch, whether anything in the base models needs to be added. So
That's
if
right.
we could get the authors together to do that offline and then come back and report to the working group, that'd be really
if you want to
helpful.
define KPI on your link level or whatever that, I think we can actually point that as well if you have that, but I haven't seen it, so sure, we kind of create the container at this level. Yeah.
Tariq Saad, my question, I think it was raised, the point was raised, but some of the performance metrics might be technology specific.
Correct.
Like, SNR for optical and all that.
Right.
You don't want them to show up for packet tunnels, for example, right?
No, that's correct.
Okay, so I'm hoping the idea is to augment the right technology tunnels.
Right, we can.
With the performance metrics.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
I think
We need to move on to the next one.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And if you could, 8 minutes.
Well, here we just explain our consideration for deployment PC in native IP network. Currently, there are 5 experts from the client company to propose the main content of this presentation is I just give the brief introduction or background of our proposal, and secondly give our solution for this requirement. And thirdly, the feedback for the previous comments. The last is the deployment consideration. So this is the scenario and requirement that I introduced in last 2 IETF meeting. The main consideration. Sorry. The main consideration is that we in the native IP network, the traffic between 2 endpoints always follow the IGP shortest path, but the traffic is varying in real time. Currently, there is no efficient way to assure the end-to-end traffic performance for the required IPv4 application. Currently, exists a solution such as the ISVPT or SR work only for the labeled network or IPv6 traffic. So here our requirement for the solution is for the native IP network is the end-to-end optimal path should be calculated and deployed in simple manner. And the second consideration is if we introduce the PC component, the control and fault plan should be optimized. That is to say, we need to reduce the number of the distributed protocol and reduce the number of forwarding steps on the routers. Here is our proposed solution for this requirement. The key concept for the solution is we separate the control for the prefix and their path. The first is we different the prefix advertisement by the different BGP sessions. The second is we centralize control and deployment the path to the BGP next hop for the different prefix. This is the simplest scenario for the solution. We can, in this graph, we can build two BGP sessions between the edge router and the advertisement different prefix via the different BGP session. And the PC will calculate the optimized path for this BGP next hop and deployment result on the routers. So the effect is the prefix and their path can be adjusted in very flexible manners. And the unpath router, for example, the R2, keep only very specific policy to the BGP peer, not to the route to prefix as done by the BGP prospects. This is a general introduction for our solution. Here we give some feedback on the comment for the in the previous meeting. The first is from Daniel. He said that we already have a solution for T in IP network called MPS. Our consideration is MPS T is major flexible and useful solution for many network and customers, but it works only for labeled traffic and also bring additional control plane load. This is one of the reasons for emerging of SR technology. But SR can only work in the IPv6 or MPLS-based networks. The second is from Jeff and Xiacheng. It is they want to compare the BGP flow spec and our solutions. Here our feedback is that the BGP flow spec need to set policy on every prefix on every router. Our solution is decrease that burden. The third is from the chair allow and drop at the concern about the relationship with the PCC use case. Here we have stated in the draft that the PCC use case and our draft are two branches of the PCC architecture. The first draft focused mainly on the usage of PCC architecture within MPLS network, and our draft focused on the usage of the PCC architecture in native IP network. The third is from George. That is two questions. Is every node running BGP? Our answer is yes, but only the edge router will build the dual or multi BGP session with the router reflector, and our router need only keep the traditional BGP session with router reflector. And the second concern question is there any possible loop of deployment? We answer the optimum path will be calculated by the PCE, and we can deployment the path in backward directions to avoid possible temporary loop when in deployment. So here we just for the summary for comparison with our other technology. As I mentioned, we have compared with the BGP flow, overflow, and segmenting, and the first tool has some scalability and performance question or extensibility. And these are currently only suitable for the IPv6 or MPLS network, not applicable for the native IP4 network. Our solution currently needs the PCAP extension because we want to use the PCAP protocol to transfer the key information to the router. The last compared with segment routing, this function and description is from the description of the segmented net. That it mentioned the segmentation can have these four functions: the traffic engineer, unifying the forwarding plan and on-demand network, and the failure protection. We have compared for these two functions, for these four functions, the current solution, if we deployment the PC in the network, we can achieve this result as the segment routing. And for other two comparisons, the native IP support, as I mentioned before, the segmentation only supports the native IP6, and our solution can support the native IP6 and the native IPv4. And for packet forwarding, the SR requirement, the MPS stack or IPv6 header trains, and we just use the traditional packet forward. So this is the last slide for the deployment consideration. We consider the scalability. We think the scalability is similar with the BGP layer 3 pin solution, and the PC can assure the high availability of the operator path, and we can deployment in the increment manner, and the first deployment in the congested route pairs. We can also use this solution for the pure ITP network. So if we can adopt the UEP or VLAN technology, we can use the same procedure to solve the problem. So here we just ask working for the further actions. Can we adopt as a working group or a recommend from attending?
All right, thank you. In the interest of time, I'd like questions to go to the list. From a procedural standpoint, I'd like to get some feedback on this work from the room. How many people have looked at this draft? It's a few people. How many people think that we should be looking at this style of traffic engineering? So native IP traffic engineering as described in the draft. Now, it's okay if you haven't read the draft, but just listen to the presentation or the presentation at the last meeting. So anyone is welcome to raise their hand if they think it's a useful approach. So how many people think that this is a good thing for the working group to be working on? Authors, you should raise your hand if you're an author, at least. So, you know, you're not getting a whole lot of support here. Perhaps the answers that you provided in your in the slides, send to the list, because we can talk about it there, see if that generates any additional interest. From my standpoint, and you know, I haven't really talked about it with Pavan or the AD, but from my standpoint, I'm not seeing enough support in the group to work on it at this time. So I think if you could do more to help generate that interest, that might be useful. Thank you. So we're going to move on. Same comment, 8 minutes, please.
Hi, I'm Harish Sitaram. So on behalf of my co-authors, just want to present an update to the draft that we presented at the last IETF. So this is basically a draft, just to give a quick recap, offers a way to, it provides different solution options on how to introduce segment routing into an existing RSVP network. There were 5 different ways or solutions that the draft covered. There was some discussion on the mailing list post the presentation in the last IETF, and we updated the draft for the O2 version to add in some content on DiffServ TE, specifically on the 2 different models of some procedures on how to update the maximum reservable bandwidth when DiffServ TE is on. So, so that's pretty much the update that we have. And at this point, we just want to ask for working group adoption.
All right, since that was nice and quick, we actually do have time for questions.
There are any? How many think that the working group should be concerned with coexistence of signal TE together with SR-based TE? It's a reasonable number. How many have read this draft? I would say about the same number. How many think that this draft is a good foundation for the working group to be working in this area? I'd say about the same. So I think there's reasonable support for that. We'll take it to the list. Thank you.
Rakesh?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rakesh Gandhi, and I'm presenting the draft on the pass without for associated bidirectional LSPs.
You have to eat the mic.
On behalf of the authors listed. So agenda is as following. We'll look at the requirements and the scope of this document, and then we'll review the pass without procedure for the bidirectional LSP and as well as LSP association at midpoints, and then we'll discuss the next steps. So requirements basically the associated bidirectional LSPs they have been deployed in the packet transport networks basically to take advantage of the TFRR without having to migrate to the GMPLS signaling like TLS-TP. The scope of the document basically single-sided and double-sided associated bidirectional LSPs, and LSPs can be co-routed or non-co-routed. So first issue being discussed in the draft, there can be multiple bypass tunnels present on midpoint PLR nodes. In this example, node B and node C, we have two possibilities, north and south bypass tunnels. So bypass assignment coordination is desired for both non-co-routed and co-routed LSPs. The second point being discussed in the draft, that when fast route occurs on, in this example, link BC, we have protected LSP, LSP1 and LSP2, and now restoration LSP, LSP3 and LSP4. So there are many LSPs at node D, for example, with this same matching association object. So this creates an ambiguity in association and bypass assignment. So for pass it out, basically it relies on the procedure or mechanisms defined for GMPLS pass it out. So first step is to identify which LSP is forward LSP and the reverse LSP for the associated bidirectional LSPs. So for single-sided, it's easy. It's the one that has the reverse LSP object. For double-sided, the proposal is to use the LSP that originates on the higher node address. The RRO, the bypass assignment object, is used to coordinate the bypass assignment. So it's initiated on the forward LSP and reflected on the reverse LSP. FRR is triggered independently on both LSPs. The procedure is applicable to both co-routed and non-co-routed LSPs. So when we're using it for the co-routed LSPs with node protection, there may be a desire to do re-co-routing. However, unlike GMPLS LSPs, there is no RSVP state timeout issue present here. So this is an example of how extender ID can be populated, which makes it unique per LSP association pair and removes the ambiguity. There are many other ways of populating this as well to work around the issue. So we welcome your review comments and suggestions. Is this useful functionality to have? And if yes, request for the working group session.
So Stuart Bryan, a bit of a dumb question really. How do you not know that you've got a one-way failure of connectivity, in which case you wouldn't get the co-rooted behavior that I think is called up?
Yeah, so there is, that's also present in the GMPLS FRR as well. That assumption is that you have bidirectional failure and then you try to reroute on both directions. This is especially an issue for co-routed, that you want to go back to the co-routed path.
But the change in the reverse direction may be relatively slow. Is that an accepted behavior? Because in the first direction, you can do fast reroute, right? Because you're not getting any BFD packets to tell you that the thing is still live. But they may be getting through in the other direction, so the other end may not know that it needs to co-route or co-reroute.
Yeah, so there is an assumption that the failures are bidirectional. If you have one direction, then there is an issue of state timing out or going on co-routed and whatnot.
But isn't a one-directional sort of almost as often as common as a two-directional failure?
Say that last part again. I didn't hear you.
But isn't a one-directional failure just as likely as a two-directional failure? I mean, you know, one of the two lasers goes or one of the two receiver diodes goes.
Sure.
Yes, but these are level
George
theory.
Swallow.
George Swallow. These are level theory things, and the IGP will take the leak down anyway, so you do want to reroute both directions.
Oh, I don't want to do it. I mean, I was just worried that it didn't work. It's a one-directional thing. Okay.
Tariq Saad, back to the comment from Stewart. We left a note in the bidirectional FRR that if packets are received on the bypass, so the downstream node can trigger FRR in the reverse
In the
direction.
control plane, yes.
So that might address the comment you
Right,
had.
okay, yes, you've got that, it will work cleanly, otherwise you're waiting for the second protocol, tell you that's not what passed.
We left it as a note for implementation.
Yeah, so that's we call it re-co routing, but that's a control plane based for. Thanks, Tariq.
Yeah, okay, he basically answered that, so.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, how many people think that this is functionality that we should be working on in the working group? Reasonable number. How many have read the draft? Fewer people, but still okay. How many people think that we should adopt this draft as the foundation for the working group? I see arms going up and down. Can you raise your hand if we should adopt this draft? I'd say a little less than thought we should be working in this area, but still a reasonable number. Is there anyone who has some reservations they think is worth discussing of why you don't think we should adopt this draft? Okay, well, if you don't want to talk about it now, I think that's enough support to take it to the list. And if you have reservations, please discuss it there. And with that, we'll move on to the last. Igor. And Igor, you actually have more time. Thank you to Harish for being so quick. So before you get started, go back to the title. If you don't mind. Oh, there we go. Go back one. So this is sort of a interesting draft in itself. We don't often see, comparisons or, between us and other groups, and particularly with verses in it. What's your objective with this?
So let me start with answering your question. So basically, like 15 minutes ago, you suggested. Right. Okay. So, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Anyway, so 15 minutes ago, Lou suggested to compare two models, okay, for telemetry collection, okay, because it was not clear that the same two models were doing the same thing, and it's not clear what use cases could be covered by which models and why we are working on both models.
I don't think I said that. I believe I said compare the models and see what's missing from the one that's the working group draft and see if we need to add anything to it.
It's close enough, okay?
So does that mean you're looking at this, the purpose is to look at this other API and see what's missing inside the IETF draft?
Yeah, no,
drafts.
one of them. Okay.
Did you find anything missing?
Well, I found a lot of reasoning in the other. but this is.
You have to eat the mic.
Okay. Okay. So basically, TSD and transport SDN has a lot to do with these vertical interfaces over which applications and controllers talk to each other. Okay, and there are two families of such interfaces that currently formally defined. Okay, one is in the ONF, it's ONF Transport Working Group, and it's called like a TAPI architecture, and they define like several services that that provide foundation for such well-bound interface. And another group is the models based on the models that we developed in this group. Okay? So operators basically, it's just like with telemetry. Okay, they see that both architectures talk about exact same things. Okay, provide the same semantics and basically apparently the same use cases and stuff like that, and they cannot decide which way to go. So they usually go with TAPI on the rationale that TAPI exists far longer than TIAS. Okay, the TAPI interfaces and specifications went through multiple recommendations already, while our models are still not even RFCs and not even what's called. Okay? So, so what we felt like doing is to provide like a technical details and technical comparison to basically to remove this confusion and to show operators that what use cases could be addressed by which models in the best way possible for them. Okay, this already actually triggered quite a bit of responses from the operators, and now they could at least look into our model. So this is another reason is to promote our model. Now, the third reason is to actually solicit comments and criticism, constructive criticism from TAPI folks, okay, so that we can actually really look into the deltas and the weak and strong features of either of the families, right? And eventually come into some convergence and to have basically semantically the same interfaces, which will be very good for vendors, because for vendors it will be very easy to implement them both interfaces and provide the facade to the client the way they want. Okay, so that's we already also had these comments, initial comments from TAPI folks, and we plan to add one or two guys as co-authors to this document so that they provide their side of the story. So we'll have like an objective comparison, and we think it would be a pretty useful document at the end of the day. Okay, so
It's all right, I'll do it. Just
okay, so that's fine. Okay, so what we did, we take 4 services provided by TAPI interfaces one by one and went through them and provided the comparison with exact same semantics and solutions that could be done by our 2 basic models, which is the T-topology model and T-tunnel model. And we identified issues, for example, when we compared topology model with with a topology service of TAPI. We found basically issues which are listed on the screen, right? And some of them basically they're missing. Some of them there is like some differences, and we already had some response that, for example, on many of these issues, it's correct, that's the issue, but we are working on that, and it will be implemented in TAPI 2.0, which is, in my opinion, the best possible response, because this is a good step towards conversion. That's right. So the same story with the connectivity service. Basically, for example, we identified that, say, in TAPI, there's no way to request a connectivity service to be protected. Okay, so and we got the response that basically this is a known issue, and people in TAPI are working on that, and it will be implemented in TAPI 2.0. So the same thing with like hierarchical connectivity, potential connectivity, and other things. Okay, next one. So with the two other services, which is path computation service and virtual network service, we're basically saying that we do not provide a separate model for this, okay, which is not true, because, for example, the group just provided the separate model as well. But what we're saying is that, and what we hope will happen is that after all said and done, we will come up with a single model which will be good for both topology and path computation, okay, and tunnel model and path computation, and topology model and DMS. Okay, and there are some miscellaneous issues, like, for example, data modeling language. So in TAPI, they put a lot of effort in creating what they call core information model, which is basically semantics, which is not dependent on particular data model or particular interface, and is supposed to be automatically translated into different data models and underlying protocols. And the preferred one seems to be actually YARN model and response today, but there are others are possible. But this violates, for example, various rules of YARN modeling and hinders, for example, augmentation, stuff like that. Okay, and also security. So basically, they rely on the fact that security will be taken care of by underlying protocols and models, while we are saying that we use the generic model for security in order to provide like authentication and secure communication between client and provider for all YARN models. And the same is true, for example, for telemetry collection and notification, and the same is true for, say, scheduling of the configuration. Yeah. So the next steps, basically, again, we will get one or two guys from TAPI. We will provide things. We will basically adjust and provide like a more objective kind of variant of this document, and we will move towards that.
Hi, Scott Mansfield, Erickson. In my role as a liaison kind of person, while I appreciate this document, it is extraordinarily negative from the ONF perspective and will not foster people, TAPI people, to contribute to it. So if you really want to involve TAPI people to be part of this work, it needs to be made a little more collaborative, a little more less of a you stink and we're the best. Because if I read this and you take this to if you take this to a service provider, the only thing you say is ONF bad, IETF is simpler and better. So if that's not really what you mean and you really want to get collaboration, then you might want to soften those words a little. Just my opinion.
Sorry that we upset a few people. And first of all, basically what you just said, it's not entirely true, because we already got comments from TAPI folks. Okay, so we already got the cooperation. Okay, And then the negative tone, it's not necessarily bad thing in my opinion. At least it achieves the goal, it caught the attention. Otherwise, it could be just simply brushed away. Okay?
As chair of a working group in the IETF, I'd say that getting another SDO's or organization's attention really isn't our mandate. But coming in here and saying we've missed something in our documents, that could be very useful independent of where it comes from.
Right.
So, I think this group, I can't speak for other groups, but this group would be interested in hearing about things that we're missing, hearing about what another organization is missing, not so much useful for an IETF working group, in my opinion.
This is exactly the objective of the document, to get actually, it's a pure technical analysis.
That's great, but drop everything that says the other guys are missing something, and then it's interesting.
No, we're not saying it's missing something. We're basically saying why the semantic that we have, it's actually the real problem that we're solving. Okay? So we are not saying it's bad. We're just saying this is missing. And in our opinion, for this particular use cases, we can actually use this to get.
So again, I think I heard you say that you didn't identify anything missing in our work. And I am saying, as chair, I'd like to hear about things that we are missing in our work, not what other people are missing.
Right. So basically, what I'm saying is that this is, in my opinion, the best way to actually solicit negative criticism from the others.
Okay, so we should take like 3 quick comments. We're actually out of time, so let's do 3 quick comments and then wrap up.
My name is Michael Schorf, speaking for Nokia. We share the concerns on the wording as a versus draft is not particularly constructive. So I think there's a potential for collaboration with ONF, but not with this wording. Thanks.
Daniele, the problem is that in IETF we know Igor, in ONF they don't. That's the main problem. That said, actually, doing this kind of work was one of Fatai's and my goals when we kicked off the transport NBI design team in CCamp. Actually, in IETF we have this split between the technology agnostic part and the technology specific part, while in TAPI they have everything together. So I think this work is interesting and useful. If you could try to sync up also with the transport NBI design team in CCamp, that would be great.
I think there's a little more to add. So I also find this work in general useful because there's a lot of confusion about the different models here and there. Now, obviously, you can debate about, let's say, some of the evaluations, but I would definitely like to see this, let's say, moving forward as topic in this working group.
Yeah, just one comment. So basically, when we started working on the models, at the same time, we were asking basically other SDOs and TAP in particular to explain and to identify like weak and or negative parts that we're doing, and we were always brushed away. Okay, we never get any kind of response whatsoever. And now this was the first time when we get any. Okay, so which means it achieved the goal.
So
can I have one more?
You get the last word.
Okay, thank you. So regarding the comment from Lou about the purpose of this draft, I think actually for us, we are doing the standards for the whole industry. We are not only do the standards for IETF. So if there are some confusions in the industry, I think we could do something in any place like IETF. I think actually I support, I think this material is very useful. And as just Daniel pointed out that we can also take this material as input for the loss bound interface of the design team in CCamp. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Even though it's the very first meeting here in Chicago, I get to now say see you in Prague.
Don't forget to come to the Friday meeting.
Oh, obviously I forgot about that. Yeah, see you on Friday, then in Prague.